Hey, Tom Rabbit! I hope you got this for your recording. Hey, YouTube out there. Tom Rabbit likes to record these. Hey, Tom Rabbit!
Hey Roger, how you
I'm
doing?
doing all right. How are you?
I'm doing well. Um, what did you want to talk about?
We could talk about the agnosticism point again.
Okay, definitely. So let's just make sure that my argument is clear to you.
Okay.
If somebody is affirming a proposition explicitly or implicitly, it makes no difference either way. They're going to be the proposition they're affirming is going to be beholden to the laws of logic. Okay, namely in this case is going to be the law of excluded middle. So when an atheist, or really when anyone operates within the world, they are affirming propositions. Okay, and implicit or explicit with those propositions is going to be some metaphysical framework or model of reality. Okay, that's foundational, and God is in the category of one such model of reality, meaning that when they affirm a model of reality, it's going to entail either that God exists or that God does not exist, because they're affirming a proposition with respect to the model of reality if they're predicating meaningfully and operating in the world as such.
Okay. So what's the first premise of that argument?
If I were to formalize it, I mean, just off the top of my head, I could just say like I don't know did I say something like, I said something like, if you're like affirming a proposition implicitly or explicitly, or, I mean, I don't know if I'd really be, well, yeah, it would just be the case that if you're affirming a proposition, um, that the proposition you're affirming will be beholden to the law of logic, the law of excluded middle.
Okay, so if I'm affirming a proposition, then it is beholden to the classical laws of logic. Sure.
Yes.
What's the next step?
Okay. Now, everyone who's predicating is implicitly affirming a proposition with respect to their model of reality or their ultimate metaphysical framework, not like smaller. The way I'm defining metaphysics is somewhat narrow, just like I'm talking about the ultimate nature of reality, not other like smaller metaphysical concepts.
Okay, sure. What's the next step?
Okay. God is one such metaphysic, meaning that then if you just take, so then you could just put it into like modus ponens or something like that. You say if you're affirming a metaphysic, you're affirming something about God, either that he exists or doesn't exist. They're affirming a metaphysic, therefore they're affirming a proposition about God.
Okay, yeah, sorry, that was just a little bit fast. So I'll tell you what I've written down so far. So if you're affirming a proposition, then it is beholden to the classical laws of logic. Everyone who is predicating affirms a proposition vis-a-vis a metaphysical framework, and then God is one such metaphysic. And then after that, you talked a little fast. I didn't have time to write it down. So where do we go after God is one such metaphysical view?
If you're affirming a metaphysical framework, you're going to be affirming something about God as it pertains to whether or not he exists, and then they are affirming a metaphysic, therefore they're affirming something about God.
Okay,
meaning that they can't be agnostic.
Got it. So yeah, let me just write it all down there. Okay, got it. Okay, right. So here's my point, and I'm just looking at the structure of it. So let me just read it again back to you, and if anything's being missed, then we could cover that, because I don't want to go down the wrong road. So if you're affirming a proposition, then it is beholden to the classical laws of logic. Everyone who predicates affirms a proposition vis-a-vis a metaphysical framework. God is one such metaphysic. If you're affirming a metaphysical framework as to whether or not he exists, then they are affirming a metaphysical worldview.
Let me set that right. So that the premise would be, if you're affirming a metaphysic, you're going to be affirming something about God. So it'd be like if P then Q. So if you're affirming something about a metaphysic, then you're going to be affirming something about God's existence.
Okay, got it. Sure. Therefore, they can't be neutral, and something like this. That seemed to be your conclusion. Okay, fine. So let's just kind of look at the schematics of this kind of argument. So it seems as if what's being said, at least in certain instances, is that you have as your third premise, God is one metaphysical worldview, and then everything seems to be anchored accordingly. So in the second premise, the fourth premise, you say, if you are affirming a metaphysical framework as to whether it has to refer to whether or not he exists or something, right? Fine. And I guess what I'm saying is that, at least to me, formally speaking, it's difficult to see how this would be valid. That's the first point. The second point is to say, well, why can't I just say, instead of the third premise, God is one such metaphysics, modal realism is one such So here's how the argument would work. If you're affirming a proposition, then it is beholden to classical laws of logic. Everyone who is predicating affirms a proposition vis-a-vis a metaphysical framework. Modal realism is one such metaphysical framework. If you're affirming a metaphysical framework as to whether or not metaphysical modal realism is true, then you're affirming a position about modal realism. You can't be neutral about modal realism. Is there anything wrong with that argument?
If it's you just by modal realism, you're saying that there are real like
Possible
saying like
worlds.
real categories of possibilities and things like that, and impossibilities, like necessities, that kind of thing.
Yeah, no. So possible worlds genuinely exist.
Yeah, but that wouldn't. So like I'm talking about when I say metaphysics, I'm talking and the way I'm defining it, I'm saying the nature of possibility, what it means for things to be real.
Yeah, that's what modal realism modal realism does that. That's how they quantify over possibility and necessity. It does all the work by supposing that there are like an infinite number of possible worlds and whatnot. So it is a metaphysical view. I'm guessing.
But I'm saying like the nature, not. I mean, so I'm not like the most familiar with like the terms of modal realism, right? But if you're just gonna say that, like, just modal realism is just that there are possible worlds that are more than one possible world, then and that's all it says. It doesn't entail anything about the nature of possibility itself. Then I wouldn't
No, it does.
classify it as a metaphysics. Okay, then if it does, then you can't be neutral.
Okay, so are you neutral about modal realism?
No.
Have you studied modal realism?
If you're just saying like it's about the nature of, I'd have to see what it entails. But if I'm just saying like just on the face of it,
fair. So
not,
are you then admitting that you're non-neutral towards something that you've never studied?
yes, you can be non-neutral to things you never studied.
Okay, yeah, but when it comes to something that's as sophisticated as an entire metaphysical framework, whereby there are things that are connecting to other things, and there are accounts of possibility and necessity and the ontological status of those things that lie therein, doesn't it seem, at least from a prima facie perspective, that in order to make an assessment either way on the veracity of the theory, you must first understand it in its intricacies?
Not necessarily.
So then why do I have to understand your view then?
Well, the point is that if you believe that X is true, then anything that entails not X would just be false. So you don't have to study every non-X position to know that it's false, as long as you know what it entails, right? So the point is that I'm not neutral. I wouldn't be neutral in the sense that I'm going to be affirming a proposition that either is going to entail or entail that this whatever theory you're talking about is true or is not true. Now I'd have to see exactly. I'd have to now once I'm presented with it, I'd have to see exactly what I disagree with, right? So I could articulate that. But the point is that I'm going to be entailing a proposition as to the truth or the falsity implicitly. With respect to the position that you're putting forward.
Right. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, from an a priori perspective, I think that Platonism is true. Platonism of the kind that I subscribe to rules out the presuppositional rule. So I have no reason to investigate your view then, right?
Well, investigation of my view and agnosticism are two different things. So
no. But what I'm saying, but you made the specific claim that I don't have to investigate the intricacies of an opposing viewpoint or analyze its strengths because before the fact I have this a priori rejection of the view because I know that this other view is true. And so, sort of what I'm trying to say here is that this seems like a symmetrical situation. You can reject non-natural worldviews because you are a priori convinced to the truthity of your position, and I'm a priori convinced about the truth of my naturalistic perspective. So it seems as though just as you don't have to investigate the intricacies of my version of Platonism, I don't have to investigate the intricacies of presuppositionalism at all to know that it's false. So it seems like
well, I say
is that a result
to
that you want?
hold. I would say to hold to the falsity of your position, or to hold to the falsity of somebody else's. That's perfectly fine. Like that's not like that's fine. Like you don't have to hold. I mean, you don't have to investigate the intricacies of Christianity to hold a position as to whether or not it's, or as to why it's false,
Okay, so do you think that
or
when
that is
yeah,
false.
when you think that doctors are in the lab and everything, and they're testing alternative types of medications to see which ones are most efficacious, that if the one doctor really thinks that drug A works, they don't have any duty to investigate whether drug B works because they just think that drug A is going to work the best?
No, I
Is
would say
that
they do
how
have it. They
it
do,
works?
but the thing is that, well, no, I'd say they do. First of all,
Oh, so they do.
we're talking about. Well, no, let me make sure it's clear. We're saying that it is on the basis of, in virtue of the position that you hold to. I'm not just saying that like you never have to investigate claims. What I'm saying is that you're going to be like affirming the falsity of the negation of whatever proposition you affirm, just by virtue of the fact that you're affirming a proposition. Okay.
Okay, well, yeah, let's
So
just.
I'm not saying that you don't have to do investigation,
Oh,
right? Ever. I'm
oh.
saying what I'm saying is that in order for you to hold to the falsity of a position, it doesn't require you to investigate it,
Okay, let me ask
because
you
you
two
just be
questions.
implicitly affirming the proposition,
Two
affirming the
questions.
falsity of it.
One, do you sometimes have to investigate positions? You sometimes have to investigate things in order to produce a more informed opinion about it before rendering it false. Yes or no?
Okay, I think you're asking two different questions. I think you're equivocating a little bit. The first question, or the first issue, is whether or not you can hold to the falsity of a position. The other issue is whether or not you can have an informed position about the falsity of a position. Those are two
Yeah.
different things.
Yeah, sure. Okay, let's
All I'm
just.
talking about right now is just that what you're going to be affirming is just going to entail the falsity of every position that is negating it. Whether or
Exactly. So
not
then
the
why
position you
study
have
those
is
other
informed or not.
positions? Why study those other positions then? If it entails the falsity of the positions, why study those
Because
other
maybe
positions?
because your position may be internally inconsistent. Your position may
Oh,
be
right. So you agree that your
like
position
it
might
may
be
have problems.
you agree that your position may be internally inconsistent then?
My position?
Yeah, because you said your
My
position
position is
might.
not internally. My position is perfectly consistent with itself, and
But do you acknowledge
it
that
has
it
a
could?
transcendental grounding.
Do you acknowledge that there could be an inconsistency that you don't see?
No.
Okay, well then, so it's impossible for. Is it logically impossible for you to be wrong?
About the God's existence? Yes.
Okay, so if it's logically impossible for you to be wrong, you don't need to countenance any arguments to the contrary. Then what's the point in discussing it with people that hold very serious positions, academic positions, if I might say, that run counter to your claims? And not only do those academic positions have self-sufficiency, but those people also understand your view and find the
Well, that's a
claims
loaded
want.
question. That's a
And
loaded
so,
question.
well, I mean, it's a question. It's a loaded question because I think there's a right answer here.
Well, no, I wouldn't say that their position is self-sufficient. No, definitely not. Not
Well,
the
how do you know if
positions
you've
that
never
deny God's
investigated?
worldview.
You admitted you never
Because
investigated modal realism. How could you possibly know?
I hold that God's essential properties are transcendentally necessary for knowledge, intelligibility, and rationality, etc.
Okay,
And so
so what you're
if they
saying is
hold to a
that without
position,
investigating any other view that runs against your position, you could immediately, without studying it, know that it's false.
yes, like for example, the Christian God. I don't have to study like this is not even like complicated, right? You can study, you can have a position on something and not have studied the other positions, right? I think you're equivocating again.
No,
Now
I'm talking about epistemic. Okay.
I both hold to the falsity, and I also hold to it, have an informed opinion about it, right?
Yeah,
There's
for
also
sure.
I've investigated this, of course, I've studied this, I've researched it, um, and so that's gets given strength to what I already know.
Yeah.
But
So
yeah,
just
I mean,
going
like
back
this
to
is
what I'm sort of asking, going back to what I'm asking. Look, I think that what the issue is I'll just lay it out instead of doing it dialectically because it will be a little bit more quick. I think that, and this has been born again and again in the empirical data, that people, when they acquaint themselves with views that are different from their own, there is a veritable tendency to potentially alter positions accordingly. And I guess I would just encourage you in your various endeavors to take a look at some things, like some books that might disagree with you, because I think that would be beneficial, not only for you, because I don't want to necessarily say that you want to go to the other side, but it would help strengthen your arguments. And so before casting away...
Well, you haven't given a rebuttal. You haven't given a rebuttal to my for my argument that you can't be neutral. You haven't given a rebuttal for that. I mean, all you've said is that, I mean, you might find it counterintuitive. That's all. That's the only defense you've really given.
By rebuttal, are you asking for something that ends in a contradiction?
Something that would just falsify the notion that you can't be neutral towards God, right? Because
Okay.
the premises,
Yeah, sure.
as I've given it to you, it just follows from the premises that if you're affirming something about God, or if you're affirming a metaphysic, that you're following something, or you're affirming something about God, in the sense that you're affirming something about the nature of reality,
Got
and
it.
God is in such a category, and so then you just naturally be affirming whether or not God exists. You're going to be affirming
sure.
facts either with or without dependence upon God.
Yeah, so I talked about this, I think, the other day with Matt. He's the guy that has like the chihuahua with the sunglasses. Not exactly sure who he is. We had this conversation very much at length, and I guess one of my issues with this, and again, this isn't to say that I'm like intransiently stuck in this position, but this is just how things currently seem to me. So when I was presented with the argument, and you can correct me, it's something like this. So we have the law of excluded middle, A or not A, and so those two positions are exhaustive. There's no third option. I agree to that. That's perfectly valid. When Matt Dillahunty says there might be a third option, he's wrong. I agree. Fine. So we have either God exists or it's not the case that God exists. Okay, those are the only two options. One of them has to account for the transcendental laws of logic and whatnot. So I'm just assuming the tag here. One of them has to account for them. But the issue here is sort of like, it just seems like I could cut logical space up in however many ways I want to, pursuant to my ability to formulate a proposition syntactically. So, for instance, I could say either China has committed more war crimes than the United States, or it's not the case that China has committed war crimes in the United States. Those two positions are disjuncts, true disjuncts, if you'd like to say that. Therefore, the prospect of a third of agnosticism is eliminated because of this disjunct. Now, there's an option for you
No,
here.
you're misrepresenting my argument.
Yeah. So again,
What I'm not saying.
Okay.
What I'm not saying is that the mere fact that it's a true dichotomy is going to commit you to the position that there is no God. What I'm saying is that you are affirming a proposition, right? So let's say by when I invoke China, I'm going to be affirming something about, its war crimes. Okay, and then also, affirming something about America's war. Well, if I'm doing that implicitly when I'm affirming China or when I'm invoking China, then yes, I'm going to be necessarily entailing that either China has committed more war crimes or human rights violations in the United States, or not, right? But that's not the case every time somebody invokes China. They're just referring a lot of times to maybe the geographical location or the people there or the culture. They're not necessarily invoking something about their war crimes. Okay, the point is that when you're invoking propositions or just operating in the world in general, you will necessarily, if you're actually predicating, be invoking a model of reality, a context within which those facts reside. And if you're affirming a context, right, if you're affirming an ontology, a metaphysic, a worldview, then you're going to be affirming something about whether or not God exists, because God is in such a category where either the facts do depend upon him or they don't. So you're going to be affirming something about God every single time, either implicitly or explicitly, you predicate. Every time. It's inescapable.
Okay, yeah, sure. So let me just kind of abstract back and get to the original dialectical point that I wanted to go to hitherto, because it seemed as if what the original argument was, from what I've heard from Matt and from what I've heard from others, is that we have this disjunct. The disjunct represents two exhaustive positions. There's no third option. And so because of that, this I don't know position isn't mapped onto these two exhaustive options. Therefore, we need to suspend our agnosticism and take some kind of side. I guess what my issue with this kind of is twofold. One, and this is what I said before, but I have an addendum to it. That's true for all propositions. I mean, like metaphysical propositions syntactically are represented identically to non-metaphysical propositions. So if I had a proposition like either my fan is on the table or it's not the case that my fan is on the table, those are the only two options. You can't be neutral about that. Then we get to this point where you can't be neutral about anything. And if you can't be neutral about anything, then it seems as though you have to know everything. And that seems like a very bizarre conclusion. And so that's just sort of a reductio QED. So that's the first point. The second point is I could see how you could try to save this. One way is sort of what you were hinting at earlier. You could say, well, look, there's some sort of like specialness to metaphysical propositions, even though they're represented logically identically, and there's nothing really to distinguish the two. There's just something special that's not in the syntax, that's maybe in the semantics that distinguishes them. And I say, okay, but now we're going to need some kind of independent argument for that, because now it seems like the bivalence which you were originally putting forward isn't really doing the work here. What's doing the work is this is a metaphysical claim. But then it's like, look, there are like an infinity of metaphysical worldviews, right? And to say that I prima facie know the truth or falsity of every single one of them before even lifting up a single page to study them just seems to like violate your duties as an epistemically responsible agent to do a genuine investigation of all the views that are available and then to make an assessment accordingly. You can be very persuaded by a particular argument and then find another book and then be like, wow, I was wrong on that point. And it's that kind of intellectual and epistemic development that is a desideratum if you're interested in, I think, in pursuing the truth.
Okay, well, I think you're misrepresenting me and equivocating just a little bit. So moving backwards to forward, okay, what you just said about knowing that God exists and that everyone would have to know, these propositions, and also about the fact that there are, innumerable metaphysical positions. So first of all, I didn't use the term knowledge here because I don't believe, for example, that atheists know that there is no God. I don't believe they have justification even for believing that. So I'm not going to classify it as knowledge. What I'm classifying it as is the proposition that they affirm is going to entail something about whether or not God exists. So by that's what I'm saying. There's no neutrality here, that they're going to have to affirm a proposition as to whether or not God exists. Knowledge is not a relevant factor in this discussion.
Okay. Let me just dialectically get at that. So agnosticism is the admittance that the person doesn't possess knowledge, right?
It's just, yeah, but I'm not like, so yes, the way I verbalize, well, so like, that's how, so agnosticism, when it was originally coined, it was by Huxley. Like for knowledge and belief, right? Yeah, by Huxley, right? And so what I'm talking about, I'm just verbalizing agnosticism as a position of neutrality, that they're neither affirming nor denying the proposition, right? So justification here at this point, I'm not really referring to justification. That's just how I'm using the word agnosticism, just to refer to the fact that they're neutral.
Okay, so they're neutral, so they don't have knowledge about the particular subject in question.
No, not knowledge. I'm just saying that they don't have, their beliefs don't entail something.
No. So what I'm basically saying is that before, what you were saying was, look, here's this disjunct, either God exists or God doesn't exist. You can't be neutral about this, which means that you have to either affirm to the proposition that God doesn't exist or you affirm to the proposition that God does exist. And those both seem to entail some kind of knowledge claim. Like, I know that God exists or I don't know. Unless you want to say that they can with like suspend judgment and say that they don't know, in which case agnosticism would be affirmed.
Well, no, I actually, no. So the thing is that I believe that atheists are arbitrary in their reasoning. So I'm not going to classify their belief as knowledge, right? I'm not going to classify their beliefs as some sort of justified reasoning that's like non-arbitrary or non-motivated, right? I think that their belief in the not God worldview is out of motivated reasoning and their desire to rebel against God. So I'm not going to classify their belief as justified.
I mean, just because wouldn't it just be the genetic fallacy, though, to say that because someone's reason is motivating, the reasoning is false?
No. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that they're not justified. I'm not going to classify it as some sort of justified true belief.
Okay, yeah. Well, I mean, that would still be a genetic fallacy. Just because motivated, the reason is motivated, it's irrational. I mean, where's the valid rules of inference that get you to that point? I mean, for instance, let me give you an example. The prosecutor for instance, let's say, so this is Sedgwick's prosecutor, classic example. The prosecutor is motivated to criminalize the person because he just doesn't like the look of their face or something like that. Okay. But so he has bad reasons for doing it, but nonetheless, his arguments are absolutely impeccable, and the jury finds them convincing, and they convict the person. The person actually happened to be guilty. So, is what you're saying that
that's
because
not what I'm saying.
they had motivated reasons, his arguments were irrational?
No, I'm saying is that they are arbitrarily. So the first thing I said was that they are being arbitrary, right? So for the same reasons that they would reject God, it would be the exact same reasons why they'd have to reject their own position, right? So then what they're left with is that they just arbitrarily picking, and because they don't want God to exist at that point, the not God position. They don't want to be held accountable to God. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, so
maybe
they have motivated
That's
reasons, and what's the next step? They have motivated reasons, and that's bad because...
Well, their motivated reasoning is born out of the fact that they don't have a reason for their own atheism. And so they just choose atheism because they want to. It's not because they have a reason.
Is that true for all atheists? Is that true for all atheists?
Yeah, well, I mean, definitely all the ones I've talked to, but yes.
Graham Oppie. Have you talked to Graham Oppie? Yeah.
No, but so for example, Darth has talked to Graham Oppie. I was there live in the conversation, right? And I'm more than so I would challenge any atheist, PhD or otherwise. I'm not intimidated by their academic prowess, right? Because the Bible makes it very clear that God makes foolish, the wisdom of the world. I'm paraphrasing, but yeah. Has God not made foolish the wisdom of the world? So that's I'm not intimidated by anyone who wants to claim that they're an atheist, because at the end of the day, they don't want God to exist. But listen,
do you know
this is the point? Yes.
How?
Because God's revealed it to be the case.
Okay,
but that's a different issue. That's a different issue than whether or not you can be neutral towards God. Right. This is
this is a different issue. Let me just revert back to the original point. Okay. So the original point seems like we were going down a bunch of different avenues, and I'm just sort of going to summarize the discussion hitherto. So the first point that I made was that if you're going to rely on this disjunct in order to render the conclusion that agnosticism is not a viable position, it seems as though I can't be agnosticism about anything that results from a disjunct. And because of propositions can be formulated in a disjunct by definition, by the classical laws of logic of disjunction introduction, it just naturally follows that any disjunct I can't be agnostic about. So it leads to a kind of Pyrrhonian skepticism. Right, okay. But then if that's not your argument, then you have to change it from this whole disjunct thing. Because in the beginning, you did say, and it's a recorded conversation, that there was a disjunct and that the disjunct was the important thing. Great. Now we move away from that. Then it seemed like what your next step was to say, well, there's just something intrinsically metaphysically interesting here. And then I say, okay, well, then it's the case that we can't be agnostic about any metaphysical position. And again, this sort of seems to run against what our epistemic duties are as responsible agents, because it seems like in order to accurately assess and determine and come to a belief, we have to seriously weigh the strongest arguments against our positions and see if it illuminates our own position even further or causes us to have a revision of belief. I mean, this is just sort of like what the scientific philosophical method is. But if you're saying that we don't need to do that, then you're sort of running against the grain of the majority of scholarship. So that's one point.
Well, okay, go ahead.
Okay, and then the last point, which I think is salient, is to sort of say about this motivated reasoning thing, which is that you were saying, well, look, the atheist or the non-believer or whomever, they have motivated reasons, and those motivated reasons therefore make the result irrational. And it's like I don't even know if that's the case, because we could be unaware of our motivated reasons, right? I mean, you could be unaware that you have a motivated reason to have these kinds of conversations. Does it mean that your arguments are irrational? Probably not. I mean, but if you want to be consistent, you would have to at least concede to the possibility then that your arguments are irrational, and I don't think that you want to do that.
Okay. So I might have misunderstood what you were asking me, like the last time we were talking, but I did make it clear to you, like afterwards, like what I was saying, right? So I wasn't saying that merely because of the fact that there's a disjunct again, right? That therefore ipso facto means that there is a non-neutrality position towards every proposition. If I had made that mistake, I might have misspoken or misunderstood what you were asking me. But what I made it clear, and I also made it clear that it wasn't something intrinsic about like metaphysics in and of itself that made it like the propositions that refer to them any special. What I was saying was that they are affirming something about metaphysics, and by metaphysics again, I'm defining metaphysics in a very special and specific way. I'm just defining it with reference to like the nature of reality, what it means for things to be true, right? The ultimate metaphysical context, right? That all things are going to refer to when it comes to like possibility and the relationships between facts and so on and so forth. And so like small, like what like numbers or whatever, that's not going to be like in this kind of category, right? Platonism is not going to be in that kind of a category. We're talking about the nature of truth, the nature of possibilities and impossibilities. Okay. And when you answer, and that's going to be required, everyone's going to be making a statement about that because they're affirming truth, they're affirming possibilities, they're affirming relationships between facts. And that's only meaningful if you have a reference point for those things. So if you're going to be affirming something with reference to like what those are, then you're going to be affirming something about God because God is in such a category of a metaphysic as I've defined it, right? That would answer these questions.
Okay.
And so let's be clear. You're affirming a proposition, right? And so if you're affirming a proposition, you're going to be affirming the truth or the falsity of whatever it entails, right? That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that merely because there's a proposition out there and that it's only true or false that you're going to be affirming. I'm saying once you're affirming a proposition, which you are in a metaphysical case, then you're going to be doing this. And it's just true for anything where you're like implying like something either implicit, like when you're making a proposition either implicitly or you're verbalizing a proposition either implicitly or explicitly. Okay. And so metaphysics would be in such a category where you're going to be implicitly or explicitly affirming something. But there are plenty of other categories, right, where you could be implicitly saying something and you're just going to be entailing something, right? And just have to. It's just
Okay,
gonna mean that
one
you're
quick point.
saying something.
Syntactically, as opposed to semantically, could you tell me the difference between one proposition P and another proposition P without knowing anything about the content? The answer is no, right?
Yeah.
Do you agree that metaphysical propositions are represented as P?
You just mean like they're just like you mean a metaphysical proposition, like a proposition about a metaphysic?
Yeah, like P or something like that. We can make
Yeah,
it predicate
okay.
or modal. Okay, yeah, sure. Do you agree that non-metaphysical propositions are also represented in a similar fashion?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you agree that I can make disjuncts of both of them?
Yes.
Okay. So in the left-hand case, the one with God, the disjunct denies the possibility of agnosticism, right? But we have something on the right that's logically identical, but
No,
it
no, no, no.
allows
So
for
then no, I don't accept
agnosticism.
that.
Okay, which part don't you accept?
I'm not saying that the mere existence of the disjunct is makes you non-agnostic. That's not what I'm saying. Like, so this I keep making this point. That's not my argument.
Okay, so then what
Right?
does
If
what's
that
doing
was
the
the
work?
impression that I was giving to you, that's not like. So I made this clear. So look, what the point is that you can't be neutral is the fact that you are going to be implicitly affirming a proposition because you're employing a metaphysic. Okay. So anytime you are affirming a proposition, look. So look, let's just make this clear. Anytime you're affirming a proposition, you're going to be entailing things, right? You're going to, of course, entail the falsity of its negation. Okay. And so that's what I'm saying. We understand that that's the case. Now, what the rebuttal to this would have to be would be either that like God isn't in the category of a metaphysical like framework or something like that, or you're not invoking a proposition, right? Like with reference to God, like if you're or like you're not invoking a metaphysical proposition, right? That would have to be the response. And so the point is that you are affirming a metaphysical proposition every time you predicate. Like, do you deny that that's the case?
Yeah, I think I want to go back just a few steps. You said quite a bit. Let me just try to do this dialectically.
Okay.
So, do you agree that it's either the case that your propositions refer, and I'm just trying to use your language, either your propositions refer to something, I'm going to say ultimate or almighty, or however you want to cash that out, or it's the case that they don't?
Yes.
Okay. And then to me, the second thing that you're saying is that it's not the case that your statements don't refer to something ultimate, right?
Right.
Okay, therefore they refer to something ultimate. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Right.
Right.
Or they just make a reference to like something in that category, right? Exactly.
Yeah, sure. Could I give you the formal structure of that argument? So the first premise is A or not A. The second premise is not A, and then the conclusion is A.
A disjunctive syllogism, right?
Yeah, the issue with this, though, is that the second premise, not A, through double negation elimination, via natural deduction, reduces to A. So if you do the calculus, which is available, not A becomes A. So the second premise is A, but then hang on, the conclusion is A.
Yeah, I'm not a logician. Like, all I'm trying to explain to you.
If you're going to be making these kinds of arguments, if you're going to make it,
well, look, let me just explain this to you. Like, if somebody is affirming a proposition, okay, that means they're going to be like, it's going to entail certain things, right? And with reference to your metaphysic, if you're affirming a metaphysical proposition with respect to the metaphysical reality, you will be affirming a proposition with reference to whether or not God does exist or God does not exist. Okay, that is the fact of the matter. Now, if you want to dispute that, you can, right? But if that's the case, then that means they're not neutral in the sense that they're not in a position where they're not entailing the existence or the non-existence of God.
Okay.
Because they're affirming a proposition with reference to God.
So just yes or no, are you interested in the logic?
Definitely.
Okay. So then we're justified in talking about it. So the first premise of your argument is A or not A.
Okay, let's make sure we're clear. What is A? What is not A?
A was sort of what I was taking vociferous notes. A is a statement must refer to the existence of God for its intelligibility, or it's not the case that a statement. And so not A is the negation of that, which is it's not the case that a statement has to refer to God in order to have intelligibility. So A or not A.
Okay.
Okay, fine. So, and then it seems to me your second premise is it's not the case that it's not the case that, well, okay, that's just overly technical. The casual way of saying is it's not the case that your statements don't refer to some kind of higher power for intelligibility. That's not the case. So it's a double negation. Okay. Okay, fine. And the conclusion is it is the case that your statements refer to some ultimate power in order to achieve intelligibility and ultimacy, right? So
well, that's not my argument. So let's be clear. That's not relevant to agnosticism. This is more like maybe like something like an argument for God's existence.
Right. No, but is this kind of your argument with respect to God's existence at least? I'm trying to get to a point.
Well, I formulate it differently. So I would use
how would
like
you
modus
formulate
ponens,
it?
like the transcendental argument.
Yeah, let's go through that.
Well, like this is totally different from agnosticism, but okay. So like I would say something like
we're having fun.
God is required. God is transcendentally required for knowledge, intelligibility, rationality. Premise one. Premise two is that there exists and we possess knowledge, intelligibility, rationality. Therefore, God exists. God exists.
Okay.
Or not. That wouldn't be. That wouldn't be. So I actually no. That would just be transcendental. But like putting into modus ponens, you would say, assuming that X has preconditions, X exists. If X exists, then the preconditions for X exist. X exists, therefore the preconditions for X exist. X would be God, or sorry, X would be the knowledge, intelligibility, rationality. The precondition would be God. So then the conclusion would therefore be that God exists.
Okay. So just so I'm clear, I understood everything that you just said. Are we now willing to cast aside the original formulation of the argument, which is either it's the case that God grounds all intelligibility, or it's not the case that God grounds all intelligibility. It's not the case that God does not ground all intelligibility, therefore God grounds all intelligibility. Are we affirming that argument or rejecting it?
Well, I mean, disjunctive syllogisms are valid, like deductive.
No. Yeah, I'm just saying. I just want to know whether or not I have your assent to that argument.
Yeah, that's not the argument. That's not the argument I'm making.
So,
although
but
I could probably formulate transcendental reasoning in that.
Do you reject that argument?
No, I don't reject it. It's just not how I mean, I'm pretty sure I could formulate transcendental reasoning in that
Oh,
kind
so
of
you
form.
accept,
Where I would say
but
that,
so if you don't reject it, then you accept it.
sure.
Okay, so you
I
do
mean,
accept it.
yeah, it's just
You
either
do
the case
accept
that
it.
it's either the case that facts are grounded in God or facts are not grounded in God. It's not the
Okay.
case that facts are not grounded in God. Therefore, facts are grounded in
Facts are
God.
grounded in God. Right, perfect. Let's talk about this. This is the stuff that I have something at least worthwhile saying about for anyone in the audience that's interested in logic or not. So if you actually write this out, which I encourage everybody to do, you do A, and then you do a little V, and then you do not A, and then the second
Yeah,
premise
A or
is
not A.
right, and then
Not
the
A.
last
Yes, A.
is A.
Right.
Now, in logic, whenever we have a double negation, the double negation gets eliminated by the rule of double negation elimination. So that
Okay,
that
you can
that
stop
premise.
right there. You can stop right
Okay,
there.
so,
You're pulling an Alex Malpass. Okay, you know who Alex Malpass is?
yeah, I'm talking to him tomorrow.
Okay, this is what he pulled with Matt Slick. Okay, this is the problem between the modal logic that you're presenting in terms of mathematical formulas, because when we say not God, that can mean more than one thing. Are you aware of that?
Could you maybe explain your point and then I'll
So the
understand.
answer is no. Does not God, can that only mean one thing, or can it mean more than one thing? Depending on how it is formulated.
Well, my initial pre-theoretical belief is that if it's a double negation of a proposition, then it just means the proposition.
Okay, yeah. This is the problem. People who are thinking in terms of representing certain propositions as mathematical formulas. Okay, because you get guilty of being a hasty generalization. This happened with Matt Slick and Alex Malpass. Okay. So in the way that Matt Slick was communicating, and I've talked with Matt Slick about this quite a bit afterwards. All right. When we say not God, we're not, that's a truncated formalization saying the not God world cannot ground the basis of intelligibility. Okay? Okay, so the not God can be understood in two senses. It can be a direct negation of not God, so not God would equal God. Or if we say it in a truncated representation, not God, it could also refer to that not God cannot provide or ground the basis of intelligibility. You understand?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Okay, so when JRobin or people like Matt Slick tried to give a brief syllogistic representation, and somebody like yourself, not accusing you of any deception or anything like that, but if you truncate it to not God, you have to be careful which not God are you referring to. Is it the negation of not God? Or does it simply mean that not God cannot X? See the difference?
Yeah. Maybe if you guys could spell it out in the complete detail
When
that
we say
is befitting, that'd be
not
great.
God, when we say in a truncated or in a brief fashion, not God, depending on the context, but in this context, what we're saying is the not God position cannot account for the grounds of intelligibility. It doesn't, the not God, whatever that is, cannot provide for intelligibility. It is not saying not God, whatever that constitutes, does not exist.
Sure. So
this is the
Like
problem.
when you asked me,
this is the problem of semantics when certain propositions are translated into mathematical formalizations. A lot of times there's not a problem, but in this case there is a problem. Okay, and if you go back and you listen to the interaction between Matt Slick and Alex Malpass, Matt Slick, was a little bit confused at first, right? But then afterwards, upon contemplation and conversation, he realized the mistake that he was not clarifying, and the same with Alex Malpass. So when we say, either God or not God can provide the grounds of intelligibility. And we say not God, okay? We're not saying that not God doesn't exist, okay? So it would, you have to be careful. Jay is not saying not God in the sense that not God doesn't exist.
Okay, yeah, for sure.
Although that is his ultimate position.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about God vis-a-vis God, or I should say God versus not God, right? Providing the grounds of intelligibility. Either it is the case that God or not God provides for the grounds of intelligibility. If we say not God, that we are not saying God in that formalization. Although it could be interpreted that way in terms of a mathematical representation. That's a truncated form of saying not God does not have the capacity to ground the basis of intelligibility. So when you phrase it that way, it is not a negation that not God doesn't exist. We're just simply saying the not God position cannot ground the basis or principles of intelligibility.
Okay. Okay, so it's more of a conditional
I
formula.
have a question really quickly for you. I mean, when you asked me if I accepted it, were you asking me if I thought it was valid?
Oh, I was asking if you thought it was a good argument.
Oh, well, I mean, if you're gonna formulate it in the way where it's just as, God exists, therefore God exists, that's why I told you I didn't use the argument. But my understanding was you asked me, at least I was understanding that you were asking me if I thought it was like a valid argument, which of course it is, and you would have to accept that too. But I made it clear to you that I didn't. So like maybe you weren't being clear when you were asking me the question.
Yeah, maybe
because I made it clear that I don't use that as an argument.
Yeah, so let's try to really pin down then what the argument is. To me, it sounds like it's conditional in nature. So it's something like if there's a grounding to logic, then that grounding must be God. There is a grounding to logic, therefore God grounds it. Is that right?
I'm sorry, you said if there's a grounding to logic, then
Yeah,
God grounds it.
or I mean, or you could put P for something else. Like if statements are in fact, if we can make intelligible statements, then God secures that fact. We can make intelligible statements, therefore God secures that fact.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so that's sort of more what you're saying.
Right, it's just transcendental argumentation.
Okay, so we're moving away from the disjunct now. So I guess this is a little bit more clear then. So let's just go through each of the premises, and maybe you could give me just like a quick explication of why you think that. So first premise, I have it written down. If we can make intelligible statements, then God grounds those intelligible statements. Why don't you explain that a little bit?
Yeah. So God exists as that which is fundamental, ultimate. God is a mind. God is relational. He's revelatory, always truth revealing, omniscient and omnipotent. And these are required characteristics for intelligibility. Now, I'll go through God's properties, essential properties, one at a time. So for God being ultimate, there must be some ultimate metaphysical framework that exists, I'll say ultimate metaphysical reality that exists, that's going to be the basis by which truth is, right? States of affairs are actual and intelligible. And the reason for this is because if it were not the case, then any supposed, and I put this in quotes, happenstance in such a world would be spontaneous without any rhyme or reason or connectivity or correlativity. And this is just analytically the case because of the fact that by metaphysics, we're just talking about some sort of reality that would ground that these things are real, right? Aside from that, then there is no fundamental basis by which these things exist, right? So they just exist out of spontaneity and not out of any real grounding.
Okay.
So that's why there needs to be an ultimate metaphysical reality. Do you accept that?
Well, let me see if I could repeat the point back to you. It's just to make sure I understand it, and then I could probably give you an answer. So the idea is to say that the reason why P implies Q is true is because God is necessarily truth revealing. There has to be an ultimate metaphysical framework against which all facts can be made. God provides that framework, and so his account is both necessary and sufficient.
Do you know why, Roger? Roger, do you know why?
Well, yeah, I'd be open to learn. Yeah,
because every state of affairs, every discrete particular that is not God, all of that in this framework derive and depend upon the mind, the purpose, and the plan of God. Okay? So that is why facts, the only reason why facts have not only actuality but possess intelligibility, because they're derivative and dependent upon the mind and the purpose and the plan of God. All right? And this is a very important distinction, because sometimes people will just say, oh, well, God's just the creator. But we have to keep in mind that everything is what it is by virtue of the mind of God. Okay? Now, so that means every discrete particular, every discrete state of affairs is what it is because it derives and depends upon God. So it derives, I'll put it in a Ventilian sense. God is the first knower. He is the first interpreter because everything is what it is because it starts in his mind, purpose, and plan that he then executes and secures. Now, if you don't accept that for whatever reason, then what is the actuality and accompanying intelligibility? What does it derive and depend upon?
Okay, I think I'm starting to understand what you're saying.
Okay. Are you familiar with idealistic terms?
Like idealism?
Yeah, like an idealism. In idealism, they talk about a abstract universal, a concrete universal.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so from a biblical and Ventilian perspective, God is the concrete universal. He's the all conditioner. Okay?
All right.
So God not only institutes the particulars, whatever correlativeness, unity, categoricness that any particulars share or possess in actuality, they derive and depend upon the mind of God. If you choose not to accept that, inherently when you invoke things, you're going to be invoking either explicitly or more usually certain levels of categories and unity among diversity. Even if you try to lapse into solipsism, you will still be doing that. So the question is, when you choose not to accept God and that he has revealed himself, that he is the all conditioner, that he is the concrete universal, he's the supreme being, the creator, he institutes all the particulars and imposes whatever actual unity there actually is, right? Then where do you get any unity among anything? Where's that come from?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Okay. Again, I don't necessarily have firm views on this topic, but if we're going to,
of course you do.
Discuss
of course you do. You have a view right now that it is not necessary to reference the necessity of God when you invoke facts.
Okay, yeah.
That is your position.
Yeah, I suppose
because
so.
If it wasn't your position, then your position would be that it is necessary. Your predications, propositions, putative facts will either be invoked with reference to the necessity of God or without. And if you choose specifically not to adopt that your predications, propositions necessitate referencing the necessity of God, even implicitly, you are staking out a position in spite of the fact that you're claiming you're not.
Okay. Yeah, so
this is a question I asked Dr. Graham Oppy, fairly famous atheist author. Are you familiar with him?
Yes.
Okay. So he tried to do his, routine. And he's a cordial guy. I like him, but I was disappointed that he was so evasive and wanted to get rid of me because I wasn't rude or acting unbecomingly. He tried to say that naturalism, which is his version of atheism, is to be accepted because it's apparent, whereas God is not. And by implication, he was saying that naturalism, or just the world around him, just all the stuff around him, just simply is and possesses intelligibility. So I asked him the same question I'm asking you. Well, intelligibility is going to require that there are any of levels of unity among diversity when you start talking about things. Even if you just talk about your own consciousness from one moment to the next, or from one time to another. So I asked Graham Oppie, where do you get unity among diversity in your quote naturalistic world, without which you won't be able to invoke that the natural world is intelligible? You want to know what his brilliant answer was? He said, "Oh, I see books on my shelf." And then he proceeded to get rid of me, because he knew he couldn't ground the actuality and the basis of unity among diversity other than the fact that he believed it. So when you purposely refuse to acknowledge that God is, by virtue that he's revealed himself, you are implicitly claiming, whether you realize it or not, that you can speak intelligibly about your world, right? Because there's unity among diversity. Well, where's the unity come from? Since God is not the concrete universal, the all-conditioner, what is it that imposes and sustains any unity among diversity?
Right. So if you wanted my answer on this, I suppose that, again, my Platonic leanings are going to come through, but I suppose that if we're talking about the problem of the many and the one, the idea is to say that that unifying force that coheres a series of discrete elements together into some kind of unified whole would be these ideas of Platonic forms. They participate in this general form, and then that form instantiates itself into reality.
I'm not hearing a clear answer to my question. Is there something that is fundamental and ultimate,
the forms,
that institutes and secures unity among diversity?
Abstract objects.
Abstract objects don't stand in causal relations.
Yeah, no.
What does the number three cause anything?
No, it doesn't.
Good. Abstract objects don't stand in causal relations. So when you reason in your mind, either explicitly or implicitly, that God is not necessary, then there must be something else conceptually that is necessary, that provides the unity among the diversity of your existence, including your conceptualization of yourself from one time index to another, such as that there's identity over time. Even identity over time is an invocation of unity among diversity. So what is it then, since God is unworthy of your belief, in your view, what is it that institutes and secures unity among diversity?
Platonic objects.
We just went over that.
Yeah, I think.
You know what you're... Okay, hold on a second, Roger. You're like a person who gets pulled over by a police officer, and he says, "Driver's license and registration, please." And let's say I'm the police officer. You hand me your driver's license, and I hand it back to you and says, "This is expired. Do you have a current driver's license?" And you said, "Oh, yes, officer." You take back the license and you fumble around some more, and you hand me the same driver's license again. That's what you just did.
Right. I understand. I understand why you might feel that way.
So what is it, since God is not necessary in your view, what is it that institutes and secures the unity among diversity so that you can speak intelligibly, not only about rocks on the side of the road, but even the coherence of thinking of your own self, okay, in terms from one time index to another?
Okay, sure. I'll give a different answer, just because the Platonic thing might be a dead end for this conversation. So perhaps
wait a minute. Are you being dismissive? Do you want to argue that abstract objects stand in causal relations?
Oh no, that's not. I'm not. Yeah, no, I wouldn't argue that abstract.
Okay, good. Okay, so I'm waiting for an answer. What is it that imposes and sustains unity among diversity?
I think that, personally, I believe that causally effete abstract objects do that because they are the grounding or the reference
to certain
states.
That's the third time you hand me the expired driver's license.
I could give an Aristotelian argument as well.
Okay, Roger, you just handed me the expired driver's license 3 times. I would like you to tell me, instead of giving me a word jumble, what specifically is it that is fundamental, absolute, that imposes and sustains whatever unity there is among diversity?
Right. So there's unity among diversity because for each cluster or kind, there is some object to which those entities refer and derive their unity from. These objects have existed eternally, and they will never cease to exist.
Roger, is there something that fundamentally secures all unity?
Again, I would be tempted to say that I think the Platonic objects do that.
Okay, so again, Roger, you're handing me the expired driver's license for a 4th time.
I guess I think that the argument in favor of the...
When you say Platonic objects, are you talking about abstract objects?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, that's already been debunked.
Yeah.
Okay.
What I just want to say is I would offer some kind of argument in favor of this. So I'm going to offer some kind of indispensability argument, whereby we say that...
Is there something that overall imposes all unity, fundamentally?
Again, I would just say the forms. I mean, because that's just what I think.
Okay, so you just handed me the driver's license, the expired driver's license, for the 5th time.
Roger, what unifies the forms? That's a plurality, man.
Yeah.
What unifies them?
I'm asking you, is there one thing that is concretely one as opposed to an abstract one that imposes directly or indirectly all unity among diversity? Is there one thing, Roger?
I don't think there's one thing.
Okay, so you don't have a concrete universal, do you?
In the sense that, in the sense that you mean, then no, yes.
Okay, so whatever unity among diversity you conceptualize at usually an implicit rather than implicit level, you are holding to that belief in violation of the same criterion of belief that you use to dismiss God. So your position is self-refuted by violation of your own fundamental criterion.
By self-refuting, do you mean it ends in a contradiction?
No, what I mean is you're violating your own fundamental criterion. Okay, Roger, why don't you believe in God?
I'm agnostic.
No, okay, Roger, we've been through this before. Okay, Roger, are you willing right now? Will you affirm the necessity of referencing God as the necessary precondition when invoking proposition and facts? Will you do that right now, Roger?
Probably not. No.
Okay, so then when you invoke, when you invoke facts, you are by choice invoking them without the necessity of referencing the necessity of God. So other than your claim that you're suspending judgment that the existence and non-existence of God is an open question, you've already decided that God's not necessary while hiding behind a verbal costume that you're neutral when you're not. Because you're unwilling to invoke the necessity of God. Therefore, when you invoke facts, they are standalone with reference to God until shown otherwise. So you're not neutral, are you, Roger?
According to your definition, I'm not neutral. Yes.
No, Roger. Let's not play this little game here. Okay. You either you will affirm, or you will deny the existence of God, or you can make a pretense that you have suspended judgment. Right?
Sure.
That God is an okay. So, are you claiming you're suspending judgment?
Generally speaking, yes.
Okay, let's examine that claim. Okay. Now,
okay.
When you claim you're suspending judgment, this is simply not true, because you've already decided that at this juncture, it's not necessary to reference the necessity of God. You said you're unwilling. Because if you did believe that God was necessary as the necessary precondition of all facts, you would have said yes. But you said no. So you've decided that God is not necessary.
Here's a question. I just have a quick question. Is it possible to be agnostic about that second order fact? So the second order fact being, I'm not sure whether or not you need to refer to the necessity of God in order to do things. I'm just not sure.
You cannot be neutral about God in spite of the widespread popularity that people claim. The claim to neutrality toward God, regardless of how it is expressed, is about as real as a piece of plastic Civil War memorabilia. So the point is, you said you're unwilling to invoke the necessity of God as the necessary precondition. So that means that you believe that facts can be invoked as standalone without reference to the necessity of God. That is your position.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Then that's not neutral, because you've decided that facts don't necessitate referencing God. So when you speak facts, by choice, they are without referencing the necessity of God. When Robin or Matt or I or other Christians invoke facts, whether it's explicit or not, more usually implicit, we will always reference God as the necessary precondition of those facts. But you do not. So you can no longer lay claim to neutrality. So you either do or do not have something that is singularly identifiable and defensible that provides for the unity among diversity in your world, since you feel you have no need of God. So what is that, Roger?
The unity among diversity point?
What is it, then, is the concrete universal? Since God is unworthy of your belief, okay, until shown otherwise, are you violating? Okay, so in one sentence, you do not believe in God because?
Oh, I don't not believe in God. I'm agnostic.
Oh, so you do believe? Okay, so again, you're handing me a driver's license that's expired. We've already covered the ground that agnosticism is an illegitimate claim to neutrality.
I mean, I think I have some arguments in favor of agnosticism.
Okay, Roger. When you invoke facts, do you invoke them standalone with reference to God?
I don't think I refer to God when I reference that.
Okay, good. Okay, so you haven't. So you're not neutral. You've decided that facts can be invoked, and they exist for whatever reason. Okay, whether in themselves or in virtue of ultimately something else, as long as it's not God. So you're not neutral, Roger.
Right.
You claim you're neutral, but you're not.
Yeah, I guess the way
so Roger, your position is that God is not needed.
Yeah.
Okay. So Roger, when somebody believes or invokes that God is not needed, God is not necessary, that is the same thing as saying God doesn't exist.
Could I just say something quickly? I think that with respect to global versus local atheism, I'm the kind of atheism that I'm sort of being pinned to, or agnosticism, as I'm agnostic about. Like, sure, I'll completely concede to your point that by rejecting the necessity of referring to God, yada yada yada, that I'm rejecting that God and whatnot, right? But I think that there are multiple other gods that could potentially exist, and so just because I reject this God doesn't mean I don't want to then say I reject all gods.
When you say multiple other gods, do you mean that where each and every god is characterized as being ultimate? Or do you mean that there are gods that are just simply creatures that have greater powers to manipulate reality than human beings?
Yeah, what I mean is that global atheism seems to claim that all potential gods do not exist, irrespective of their qualities.
Roger,
that I reject.
Roger, in one simple sentence, You do not believe in God because? You do not believe that God is the concrete universal because?
Okay, that question I can answer. I don't think that God is the concrete universal because I believe Platonism is a more viable theory.
Okay, so that's the 6th time you'd handed me an expired driver's license.
Right. I guess I'm just still persuaded by the argument it's in its favor.
But here's the problem. Okay, you're just invoking a plurality upon a plurality. Okay, I want to know what the concrete universal is. Is it one thing? Is there one thing that dictates the unity among diversity? Or do you have a system of chaos where there is not one thing that dictates and controls what comes to pass?
Right. I hold that there are a plurality of abstract objects that ground the kinds of
Okay,
truths.
that's the 7th time you've handed me an expired driver's license.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I'm doing that
Roger, do you want to argue that abstract objects stand in causal relations?
No, I don't want to argue that.
Okay, well, that's what you're basically doing. Okay? So, Roger, what is your reason to believe that there is something that is fundamental, absolute, that dictates and secures whatever unity there is among diversity? What is that, Roger?
That secures unity among diversity.
What is it? What is it that is the concrete universal, that is singular, that is ultimate and absolute? Okay. Otherwise, because if you invoke a plurality of things, you no longer have an ultimacy because there's not one thing that is dictating everything.
Yeah, I guess I just don't think there's that kind of ultimacy.
Okay, so you don't have a concrete universal, Roger?
I have multiple universals.
No, Roger. When I say a concrete universal, okay?
Oh, okay. You were being restrictive with the use of the A.
Because,
yeah.
Okay,
then
if you have two or more things, then neither one of them can be the concrete universal because one could exist without the necessity of the other. So you couldn't have two or more things. So it can only be something that is one concrete thing that can be the concrete universal. In other words, everything derives and depends upon it, not only for its particularity, but for the unity as well. Do you have a concrete universal, Roger? Since you don't accept God?
No, I don't.
Okay, so now you have nothing that is identifiable or defensible that is the concrete universal that will dictate the entirety of unity among diversity. And so,
is that the only thing that can account for unity among diversity?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a reason for that?
Yeah, because then everything is shrouded in mystery and chaos.
I mean,
by the way, how would you even if you invoke it, how would you even establish the actuality of this plurality of so-called fundamental things, none of which are
indispensability arguments? Indispensability arguments.
No, that you would just simply it wouldn't make it necessarily true when you say indispensably arguments.
Well, no.
How is it indispensable? Okay. Would it be dispensable if God exists?
So with respect to the indispensability arguments,
would it be dispensable if God exists?
Would what be dispensable?
The dispensability arguments. Could we dispense with that if God exists? The answer is yes.
I think God would be another indispensable entity.
No. Roger, we're talking about God as ultimate.
Yeah, for sure.
So Roger, when you just say through an indispensability argument, right? You're just giving me a word jumble there. You're not really clearly communicating. So You believe that there is a plurality of things, two or more things, that exist each and of themselves. Therefore, A does not cause or maintain B, and likewise B does not cause or sustain B. So there are two or more things that exist that everything flows from. So there's nothing completely in control.
There's nothing that's completely in control.
There's nothing that is the concrete universal. So when you start to invoke
Yeah,
a
I think they're
plurality of
abstract. I think
things,
they're abstract universals. I think they're abstract universals, not concrete
okay,
universals.
good. That's the 8th time you handed me the expired driver's license.
Oh yeah, but I think that they're good arguments.
I didn't ask you about an abstract universal. I'm
I don't
asking
think
you
they're
about a concrete. So you
Yeah, I
don't
don't think
have a
so.
concrete universal. So there is nothing that dictates the state of everything.
I think the
So-
Platonic objects dictate the state of everything.
Okay. So that's the 8th time you've handed me the expired driver's license. Isn't this getting embarrassing, handing me this expired driver's license?
Well, I mean, if I have arguments that make it less embarrassing.
Okay, Roger. I mean, now you're getting as bad as the atheists are.
I apologize.
You already agreed earlier, abstract objects do not stand in causal relations. So when you start talking about the Platonic realm, you're talking about abstract objects. Aren't
Yes,
you?
I am.
Okay, but you already agreed abstract objects don't stand in causal relations. Can the number 5 cause something?
No, it can't.
Okay, so why do you keep on handing me the expired driver's license?
Because I think
Because you got nothing else, do you?
Well, I mean, because I think that even if they are causally effete, they still provide the ground for a lot of the truth.
No, they don't. No, they don't. By the way, where do you get that they even exist?
The indispensability argument.
Okay, so we're going to do this again, Roger?
Well, I mean, the conclusion of that argument is abstract objects
Okay,
exist.
Roger, that's not informative. Again, what you're saying is that there are 2 or more things that are self-contained, right? And the plurality of things that dictate the cascading events, whatever. Where'd you get that from, Roger? Where'd you get that there are 2 or more things, each of which are eternal, self-contained, but nothing is ultimate? Where'd you get that?
By eternal, you're talking about eternal forms.
Roger, where did you get how did you determine that there is nothing singularly ultimate?
How did I get the idea? Because I think that the hypothesis is implausible for a series of reasons.
Roger, that's a non-informative response.
Okay, fine. More specific. I think that this kind of divine conceptualism runs into problems with divine aseity.
Okay. Again, this is more of a word jumble here. You're not being informative to me. Okay? And you're doing it on purpose, Roger. Roger, how were you able to determine and verify that there can't be anything that is singularly ultimate?
I think that there can't be something that's singularly ultimate in the way that you're describing, specifically
Roger,
because... Yeah.
Is it impossible that there can't be something that is singularly ultimate? Is that impossible?
Yeah, I don't think that it's logically impossible.
Okay, so then what that means is, when I say it impossible here, it's not really a contingency. What it really means, it cannot be. Well, the reason why it cannot be is because then there must be 2 or more things, each of which exist with independence of the other from eternity. Where'd you get that from, Roger?
Where did I get the idea that there can't be...
Where did you get the idea that there are 2 things that exist from eternity, self-contained, unconditionally non-dependent?
From deductively valid arguments from scholars that have university positions.
Yeah, okay. More word salad. Okay, that's a non-informative response.
Yeah, I could just give you the argument then.
Then why didn't you?
Okay, sure. So the idea is to say...
didn't? No, because you were being evasive is what you were doing.
Well, no, I apologize.
Roger,
if I was.
How were you able to determine, okay, that there's a plurality of things, each of which are self-contained? Are each of these things self-conscious? Are they communicative?
No, they're not conscious or communicative.
Then how do you know? How do you know that they're there?
Through deduction, through the indispensable.
Okay, another non-informative answer, Roger.
Okay, well, yeah, okay, then this is how I know. We assume the existence of what our best theories quantify over. Our best theories for the example in the case of physics, our best theories quantify over the existence of electrons.
So now you're reasoning abductively?
No. This is deductive.
Roger, I want in clear terms instead of verbal mumbo jumbo. How were you able to determine in clear terms that there are two or more things that are self-contained and they exist without the necessity of the other. How'd you determine that, Roger?
In a slogan, because I think that moral facts and mathematical facts exist.
We're not talking about that. See, notice how you told me you determined that. When did you determine this, Roger? Was it today? Was it yesterday?
It was through years of study at the academic level.
Okay, so now you're lying, okay? Because you just told me moments ago that you said that Platonic forms were ultimate.
Yeah, yeah, that's fine, yeah.
So now you're lying to me.
Well, how?
Because now you're saying things that are not Platonic forms are what are self-contained, and that they are the basis of something.
Well, I think moral facts are Platonic forms.
Okay, so in other words, 1 second it's Platonic forms, which are abstract objects. Now you're referring to something that is not an abstract object, but a concrete.
What was I referring to?
Were you not earlier telling me that abstract objects are what make God unnecessary?
I did say that, yes.
Okay, but now you're telling me years ago you decided that there were two or more concrete objects that were dictating everything. Did you just say that?
Is my mic still on? Yeah.
Okay, so you're lying. So you're lying to me, Roger.
Well, no, not really. I'm trying to represent myself.
Roger, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You're telling me right now, years ago, you determined that there are two or more concrete objects that dictate everything, including unity among diversity. But earlier, you told me that what was ultimate are Platonic forms, abstract objects. But now you're telling me it's concrete objects that are what dictate everything.
I don't think I ever said concrete object dictated anything.
Goodbye, Roger. See you later.
Okay.
Back to the audience you go. You see, folks, and by the way, I'd like you to give your commentary, Matt. See, this is what the unbelievers resort to: deception, evasion, word salad, double talk. Did you catch that, Tom Rabbit? Hope you upload that to YouTube.